So all of those structural pieces of democracy that really amount to one person, one vote that have been undermined over the last several decades are brought to you by the very same people who are bringing you increasing restrictions on individual liberties, and abortion is just the tip of the spear.
Hi there. This is Brad Rourke with the Charles F. Kettering Foundation. We're a nonprofit, nonpartisan operating foundation that focuses on advancing and defending inclusive democracy. I'm talking with Ilyse Hogue, who is former president of NARAL Pro-Choice America, the oldest abortion rights group in America, is a partner at social impact firm Purpose, and a senior fellow at New America, where she oversees the Gender Extremism and Engagement Project. The Supreme Court recently heard oral arguments in the case FDA v. Alliance for Hippocratic Medicine. This is a case that is in the news because the Supreme Court could decide to uphold a lower court ruling that bans mifepristone, a drug used in roughly half of all U.S. abortion procedures. We're going to learn just what is at stake here today. Ilyse, thank you for taking time with me today.
It's great to be here, Brad. We love what Kettering does.
Let's start at the top. What do Americans need to know about this case, Ilyse?
Well, the case very specifically was about a group of doctors in Texas, which I should disclose up front is my home state, that were arguing that they wanted the medication abortion drug mifepristone sort of banned nationwide because they would be required, in the case that mifepristone sent a pregnant woman who was in the process of terminating her pregnancy to the emergency room, to be, in their own words, complicit with the abortion procedure. So, in fact, they were asking that the FDA's ruling, the Federal Drug Administration, which is an executive branch ruling, that the drug was safe, essentially be overturned by the courts. A few things worth noting. It was the first abortion case back in front of the court since the Dobbs ruling, which essentially overturned Roe and set abortion rights back to the states. 14 states almost automatically outlawed abortion, and Texas was one of them, right? So one of the fascinating pieces of this case is you had a set of doctors in Texas who were neither prescribing this drug nor taking this drug, suggesting that they had standing to be able to sue for what they would call remedy, so that they didn't ever have to encounter patients who might have taken the drug.
Let's draw a line between this case and democracy for a moment. Help me fill in the blanks between what the arguments are and what the potential outcomes are for this case, and what it might mean for people's daily lives and their democratic lives.
I think that the implications are both massive and far-reaching. So starting with the most individual right? The right to bodily autonomy, the right to be able to make the decisions about the most important and intimate things that happen to you, whether you decide with your doctor, with your family, with your clergy, if that is your desire, or some politician who knows nothing about your life circumstance wants to decide for you. You know, in Dobbs, it was clear that those politicians and the people who support them, who have a very rigid way of looking at those decisions, are really, really determined to do away with individual decision-making, which I think is sort of the cornerstone of a vibrant democracy.
Ilyse, you were actually in the room during oral arguments, and you saw and heard how the justices reacted to all the arguments. So one of these questions was this standing, which sounds like the standing is hypothetical, if anything. What other arguments came up, and what's important about them?
I think the justices were quite skeptical of the argument that the doctors in this case actually had sufficient impact to have standing. So that was a big topic of conversation in the room. I think some other things that were obviously quite of interest to the justices were when a agency like the Food and Drug Administration, who is tasked with crucially important things like drug safety and effectiveness, can be challenged by individuals, or can be challenged by a lower court. I think that was really a big question, and Judge Jackson really leaned into that. Like, what special insight do these judges have in the Fifth Circuit that they would know more than all of these reams of studies of the FDA? And if it was found that the FDA could be challenged on it, would just open the floodgates for any individual or doctor who decided they didn't like another drug to challenge the FDA's authority on that. It would create chaos with our systems by which we sort of regulate, authorize, and sort of determine medical effectiveness of drugs. It would also, and I think this was concerning to even the conservative justices, would create havoc with the markets, the pharmaceutical markets, because there is a built-in predictability knowing what FDA authorization and regulation looks like. We all have different lives. We all have diverse lives. We know them better than anyone. This is a foundational question of who gets to make decisions about our bodies and who knows best. So fundamentally, I think we knew through Dobbs that they were chipping away at our democratic rights. And then, of course, from a inclusive democracy and equity perspective, when access is limited, people with less access already are the ones who suffer the most, right? So if you live in Texas, abortion is illegal in Texas, you have means, you have a salaried job, you have childcare help, you have money to travel, you can fly to Chicago, where abortion is legal, and get whatever you need. If you don't, you don't, right? And that's why in places like Texas, where we have seen sort of the real grievous impact of this law, we see it most frequently in people who are already struggling in some way or another. So that's a pretty significant blow to inclusive democracy. So you've got the control, you've got the ability to access rights. And then I think one of the things that's really, really clear in this case is now you've got that challenge to the separation of powers, right? So you've got administrative agencies that are tasked with doing a job that they've developed years and years of expertise in. And then you've got a whole other branch of government that has zero expertise in the question at hand. And you're saying, you don't get to do your job because I'm in control now. It is critical for our democracy to have those separations of power, to let the science people do the science, to let the governing people do the governing. And that, I think, was a piece of this case that was not lost on the justices and the lawyers involved, but I think needs a little bit more of a megaphone to the public at large. Like, we have seen what happens in countries where the judiciary decides that they are all-seeing and all-powerful, not part of an operational system. And it's never really pretty. Both Justice Alito and Justice Thomas proactively brought up, instead of bringing suit on these grounds where standing is questionable, and the idea that one of these doctors might ever treat, a patient as a result of having taken mifepristone is questionable. Why not actually go up against this question through what's called the Comstock Act? This is something that your listeners and viewers are going to hear a lot more about in the coming months and years. The Comstock Act is a very, very old, what we would call zombie legislation. It's so old, it's been basically irrelevant for a long time. It was originally constructed to prevent the peddling in what anyone termed sort of obscene material through the mail. Can't send anything determined to be obscene through the mail. It's so broad, it could be anything. Was originally sort of thought of as pornography. In this case, they're suggesting that because some of the original language talked about anything promoting licentious behavior, that sending medication abortion through the male, which is very, very common practice right now after having done a telemedical appointment with a doctor, would be illegal under the Comstock Act. And both Justice Alito and Justice Thomas brought that up preemptively. And you should remember that because it's coming back.
You're kind of blowing my mind. So some of the Supreme Court justices were actually encouraging or opening the door to banning these practices because of licentious, they promote licentious behavior.
Yes. Medication abortion has been really, really troubling for those who would like to control the bodies of people who can get pregnant. It's much easier to target and intimidate and restrict abortion when they're taking place in a central location. Medication abortion actually puts control a lot in the hands of women who need the procedure, and it's perfectly safe up till 10 weeks of pregnancy.
It's easy to say to yourself, though, that, oh, these are other people's decisions. What are the things that people ought to be doing right now on these issues if they care about reproductive freedom?
Yeah, it's one of the things that I really learned spending my 8 years at NARAL and wrote a lot about in my book is it sounds very simple, but speak up. Since Roe was handed down by the court, the people who believe that these decisions should be left to a woman and her family are the majority. The people who want to do away with that are the minority. However, and this is a big however, the minority has been able to make the gains that they have made because we are silent on a lot of these issues. We feel uncomfortable talking about them. We don't like talking about sex that much. We definitely don't like talking about abortion that much. But when we do that, we sort of shatter the myth that this is a deeply divided country or anything like that. In fact, as every election since Dobbs came down has shown, there is across partisan lines, across geographic lines, across age lines, across ethnic lines, there is a common belief that families should make their own decisions. So we need to talk about it. We need to talk more loudly about it. And we need to set expectations for anyone we're electing. And judges get elected in the states, not every state. Many states get appointed. Some states they get elected. But if someone's appointing your judges, they are someone you voted for. Otherwise, you're electing judges. And this is really, really important to make sure that we send a clear message that there can be judicial accountability in these cases, that the court is not omniscient, that the court works for the people and not the other way around. I have spent an enormous amount of time looking at how abortion came to be so central to American politics. And it was always designed to be control in and of itself. A lot of the patriarchy doesn't want women to have decision-making power, wants families to look a very specific way, not inclusive at all. These are the same people that oppose families and adoption and surrogacy for LGBTQ brothers and sisters. These are the same people who are okay with outlawing IVF, as nearly just happened in Alabama. And these are the same people that are coming for contraception as soon as they think it's politically viable to do that, because they have one way of living life and they want to coerce the rest of us in living our lives in that same way. But they're also perfectly happy to undermine democracy in doing that. And that is why we've seen some of the things that we've seen with regard to changing rules in seating justices, gerrymandering to make it easier to elect people that agree with them. So all of those structural pieces of democracy that really amount to one person, one vote that have been undermined over the last several decades are brought to you by the very same people who are bringing you increasing restrictions on individual liberties. And abortion is just the tip of the spear.
Ilyse Hogue, thank you for this important update from the front lines of the fight to protect Americans' reproductive freedoms and inclusive democracy.
Thank you, Brad, for all you do.